The sun burned low, casting long red shadows over the Tenorio homestead. Wind carried dust and smoke, and in the air was that dry metallic scent that came before trouble. Reina Tenorio stood barefoot on the porch, arms folded tight against the wind, watching the two riders approach. She knew what they were. Debt never walked it rode in on horses it didn't feed. The men dismounted without asking. One of them, a narrow-faced Anglo with a city hat and dustless boots, looked around like the place offended him. The other, heavier, chewed on a toothpick and leaned on the porch rail like he owned it. "We're from the Las Cruces Office of Collections," the narrow one said. "Your father still owes 4 months on the loan. Final warning." Reina didn't speak. She let the silence work on them. Behind her, the wood of the screen door creaked as her younger brother Mateo peeked through. The heavy man flicked a hand toward the dry yard. "Place like this won't fetch much, but we'll take what we can. Mule tools the land patent if it's still got ink." Reina's voice was steady. "We have until the end of the season." The man smiled like someone watching a sheep limp toward the butcher. "Season's end is a week early this year." They left without tipping their hats. The sound of their horses faded, but the threat stayed. Inside, her father was coughing again, deep, wet, and rattling like something tearing loose from inside his chest. He lay on the cot in the main room, a damp cloth pressed to his forehead. Mateo sat beside him, reading aloud from a borrowed geography book, trying to make the world sound bigger than their shrinking lives. Reina stepped into the room and set the bolt on the door. Her father's cough subsided just enough for him to whisper, "They come again." She nodded, kneeling to wipe his forehead. "They'll be back." He closed his eyes. "I'm sorry, mija." It broke something in her to hear that. Her father had worked his body to ruin in the copper mines near Hillsborough, then scraped out a living farming what land hadn't turned to stone. And now this. A house made of patchwork wood and prayers a younger brother, with eyes too smart for his age, and a daughter staring down the barrel of poverty like it was a loaded gun. That night, Reina couldn't sleep. She sat at the table by oil lamp, a blank scrap of paper in front of her hands, ink-stained and aching. She'd written 6 letters asking for work, none had brought answers. The chickens were too thin to sell. The mule was lame. Even the earth outside felt tired of giving. She heard Mateo's soft footsteps in the dark. He stood in the doorway, hair mussed, clutching the map he'd drawn himself on scrap paper. His fingers pointed to a green valley drawn with childish precision. "There's water here," he whispered. "North of the Sacramentos. Maybe it's real." She forced a smile. "If it is, you'll find it someday." Mateo tilted his head. "Maybe we could go there. All of us." Reina didn't answer. She reached out and pulled him into a hug that lasted too long. The knock came just before dawn. Not the frantic banging of neighbors needing help. Not the boot kicks of collectors with threats. This knock was deliberate, 1, 2, then stillness. Like someone who didn't need to knock again. Reina moved to the door, lifted the rifle from its hook without thinking, and cracked it open. The man on the porch was tall, broad in the shoulders, and wrapped in a weather-worn duster. His hair was long and black, pulled at the nape, and his face was shadowed by a brimmed hat dusted with the mountain's red sand. His skin was copper-toned, his eyes a clear, unreadable hazel that seemed older than his years. He took off his hat. "I'm looking for Señor Tenorio." Reina gripped the rifle tighter. "He's sick. I heard about the debt," the man said, "and the land trouble." She narrowed her eyes. "From who doesn't matter. What matters is what I can offer." Behind her, her father's stirred voice, ragged. "Let him in." She hesitated, then opened the door fully. The man stepped inside without looking around, but the way he moved told her he noticed everything. "My name is Tomas Nahashta," he said. "I have land northeast of the Sacramentos. Livestock. A need for someone who knows hard work. And I need a wife." The room went still. Even Mateo from his corner stopped breathing. Reina felt her heart thump once hard. "You don't know me." "I know enough," he replied. "I know your family needs help. I know your name is spoken with respect in these parts. And I know I'm not the only man who's considered making an offer." Reina's father coughed hard. When it passed, he looked Thomas in the eye. "What are you offering exactly? I'll clear your debts, provide for the boy, and Reina will live in my home safe and fed. I won't force her. But it's a clean offer, one I don't make twice." Reina looked at her father. He nodded slightly, lips trembling. She stared at Tomas. His face was hard to read, like a bluff with too much shadow. There was no ring, no flowers, no softness, just an offer wrapped in dust and necessity. "What kind of home?" she asked. "Sturdy, in the mountains, quiet. And what kind of man are you? One who doesn't make promises he can't keep." She didn't sleep again that night. Instead, she sat on the porch with the lamp low and the desert wind curling around her braid. In her lap was the map Mateo had drawn. Somewhere in those folds of imagined land water still ran. Life still grew. The wagon would come at sunrise. She had no dowry, no new dress, no ring on her finger. Only her name, her breath, and the weight of every choice her mother never got to make. And when the light cracked the horizon and the sound of wheels echoed down the road, Reina Tenorio walked out of the house without looking back. I didn't know what waited at the end of the trail, but I knew what waited if I stayed. The wagon creaked forward over the hard-packed dirt, its wheels rattling in rhythm with Reina's heartbeat. Tomas Nahashta sat beside her reins in hand-eyes focused on the road ahead. The mule pulling them was steady but slow, and the path curved like it didn't quite want them to follow. Reina hadn't spoken since they left the Tenorio homestead at sunrise. She held her shawl tight around her shoulders, though the morning wasn't cold. Just empty. The house she'd grown up in shrank in the distance behind them, and for a moment she swore she could hear Mateo shouting her name, but it was only the wind. She hadn't kissed her father goodbye. He'd been sleeping, wheezing through his breath, and she hadn't wanted to wake him. She hadn't wanted to see his eyes, the ones that looked too much like hers when they held regret. The land stretched around them in long, brittle waves, mesquite brush, yucca rocks scattered like broken teeth. A few buzzards circled far off. The sun was climbing, but still soft, not yet cruel. Tomas said nothing. He seemed made for silence. He didn't fidget or hum or chew tobacco. He just drove the wagon like it was a part of him. Reina finally broke the quiet. "How far? 3 days," he said. "If the trail's good." She nodded. Her hands were cold despite the rising heat. She pressed them between her knees, trying to stop them from shaking. The hours passed. At noon, they stopped by a dry arroyo. Thomas handed her a water skin, then pulled smoked meat and flatbread from a small pack. They ate in the shade of a boulder, their conversation no thicker than dust. "You always this quiet?" she asked, mouth half full. He looked at her. "Words are like bullets. You use them careful." She raised a brow. "I've known men who never stop talking. Usually means they're hiding something." He smiled just enough to show a dimple. "And what do you think I'm hiding?" "That's what I aim to find out." That earned a nod. "Fair." By nightfall, they'd reached a sparse grove of pines. Tomas tied up the mule and built a fire with dry twigs and practiced hands. Reina sat close, the flames chasing away the chill that dropped with the sun. He didn't look at her when he spoke. You scared?" She didn't lie. "I'm not sure what to be yet." He tossed a pine cone into the flames. It hissed, snapped, then fell still. Most folks are scared of the wrong things. And what's the right thing to be scared of, not knowing yourself? Raina turned that over in her mind. She wrapped her shawl tighter and laid down on the bedroll he'd offered her. The stars blinked above like they were keeping watch. Her body ached from the wagon seat, but her mind wouldn't rest. She listened to the wind in the trees and the steady breath of Thomas near the fire. He didn't snore. He didn't toss in his sleep. He just existed, quiet, solid, unreadable. The second day began colder. Higher ground brought thinner air and frost on the morning rocks. Tomas gave her his second blanket without asking. She didn't thank him, not because she wasn't grateful, but because she sensed he wouldn't expect it. The road narrowed as they climbed. Mountains rose ahead in dark folds, not sharp and jagged like in the stories, but wide-shouldered, ancient, and unmoving. The mule struggled more here, and Raina offered to walk beside it for a time. Tomas didn't stop her. She liked the silence better now. It wasn't heavy. It just was. That afternoon, they passed an old wooden sign nailed to a tree. The letters were half faded, but Raina could still read them, Los Muertos Trail. Beneath it, someone had etched a crude symbol in the bark, a wolf maybe, or a snake. "What's that about?" she asked. "Old story," Thomas said. "About men who thought they could outrun the land." She waited for more, but he didn't offer it. Around the next bend, she finally saw another person. An old man with a burro passed them going the opposite way, nodding politely at Tomas but not speaking. His eyes lingered on Raina but not unkindly. They made camp near a stream that night. Real water, cold and clean. Tomas caught 2 fish with a line and hook, and Raina cooked them over the fire, remembering how her mother used to do it with wild onions and salt. The smell made her throat tight. "You learned that from your mother?" Thomas asked. She nodded. "Still miss her every day." He stared into the fire. "I lost mine before I could remember her." Raina glanced at him. "Your father gone now. Wasn't when it mattered." She didn't press. The quiet between them grew different that night. Not sharp, but not soft either. Just close. 2 people sitting on either side of a life they didn't quite understand yet. In the early morning of the 3rd day, fog rolled through the trees like something alive. The trail had narrowed to little more than a path, roots and rocks twisting beneath the wagon wheels. The mule protested. Raina held her breath more than once. They stopped at a small ledge to rest the animal. From there she could see across a valley spread with gold trees and dark evergreens, the kind of place that looked more like a painting than real life. Thomas said, "We're close." She looked at him. His posture had changed. Straighter, like he was putting something back on. "What are you not telling me?" He paused before answering. "Where I live, it's not what you think. But it's safe, and it's yours if you want it." "If I want it," she repeated. He met her gaze. "You don't have to stay, but I hope you do." The words landed softly, but they sat heavy. The wagon rolled forward again. The trail bent sharply and climbed once more, and then just past a curtain of pines, the path opened up, and Raina saw it. A hidden valley carved into the mountains, green and wide even this late in the season. Aspen trees burning gold, a river like silver thread winding through it, and in the middle a great hacienda. Stone and adobe wide porches, red tile roofs glowing in the light. Raina's breath caught. She turned to Thomas slowly. "What is this place?" He didn't look at her. He was watching the house like it remembered him. "Our home," he said, "if you still want it." What kind of poor man builds a hacienda with gardens carved into the mountain? The wagon creaked down the slope as Reyna sat frozen on the wooden bench, staring at the valley like it might vanish if she blinked. She'd seen rich men's homes before, those squat, dusty mansions in Masila with too many arches and fat vines curling around stone walls. But nothing like this. This didn't look like wealth trying to show off. It looked like it had nothing left to prove. The hacienda stood at the heart of the valley, tucked between aspen groves and wide meadows. Its adobe walls were weathered but strong, warmed in hue by the last light of day. Red clay tiles covered its sprawling roof, and wide verandas wrapped the structure like open arms. Behind it, a long wooden barn and stables flanked the hills, and a spring-fed canal ran in neat channels through an orchard lined with peach and walnut trees. Smoke curled gently from one of the chimneys. There was life here. Reyna looked at Thomas. He held the reins loosely, eyes focused forward, his jaw set like a man preparing for judgment. He hadn't spoken since they crested the ridge. "You said you weren't wealthy," Reyna said, her voice low. "I'm not. Not in the way you think." She turned toward him fully. "This is a kingdom." "No." He gave a small shake of his head. "It's a responsibility." The wagon passed between stone pillars carved with patterns she didn't recognize, maybe tribal, maybe older. Wildflowers still bloomed along the road, stubborn against the season. They rolled past rows of fencing, hand-built and strong. Every detail spoke of care, of time, of hands that shaped, rather than just owned. 3 ranch hands were working near the barn. They looked up, nodded toward Thomas, then glanced at Reyna with quiet curiosity. No one said a word. They just returned to their tasks. A young girl, maybe 13, ran from the orchard path with a cloth bundle in her arms. Her braids bounced as she approached. "Señor Tomas," she said, smiling brightly. "They've made stew. Should I bring some to the porch?" "Please, Alita," he said. "And find Severina. Tell her we have company." The girl's eyes flicked to Reyna, her smile widening with open curiosity. Then she turned and darted toward the kitchen building behind the main house. Tomas helped Reyna down from the wagon. She stepped onto the packed earth of the courtyard and took a breath. It smelled like cedar smoke, sun-warmed stone, and something faintly sweet, wild sage maybe, or blooming yucca she hadn't noticed. A few other women moved between buildings with baskets and tools, nodding politely, but not stopping. They didn't gawk. They didn't whisper. It wasn't coldness, it was watchfulness. She felt it like a thin veil over everything. Inside the hacienda, the air shifted. It was cooler, shadowed. Thick beams held up the high ceilings, and the floors were tiled in red clay. Blankets hung on the walls, some woven, some painted. A massive stone hearth took up one corner of the sala, and wooden chairs with carved arms circled it. The fire there was already lit. Tomas gestured for her to sit. "Make yourself comfortable. I'll see to the horses." Before she could respond, he was already gone. Reyna moved slowly through the space, taking it all in. Everything felt old, but in the way of things that last. A heavy table bore shallow scratches from use. A carved trunk sat beneath the window, the leather worn but polished. A single chair in the corner had an afghan draped over it, as if someone had just left it there. Nothing here felt staged. It felt lived in. Her eyes were drawn to the mantel above the fireplace. A black and white photo sat framed in tin, an older Apache man in a military coat, stiff with pride. A woman stood beside him, her expression unreadable. Tomas had their jawline, their eyes. Reyna turned at the sound of footsteps. A woman entered through the back door. She was in her 50s, maybe older, with graying hair braided down her back and skin like river-worn stone. Her eyes were dark sharp. She carried a wooden bowl and a long spoon, both still dripping with steam. You're the girl, she said. It wasn't a question. Reina straightened. Reina Tenorio. The woman set the bowl on the table. Severina. She pointed to the stew. Eat before it cools. You'll need strength here. Reina hesitated. I don't put poison in my food, Severina said, eyebrow raised. That got a small smile from Reina. She sat and took a cautious bite. Beans, wild onion, soft pieces of meat, flavorful and honest. Good, Severina said, nodding. Your hands, what do they know? Reina blinked. What your hands? What do they know how to do? I can sew, cook, work a garden, but mostly I worked the land. Helped my father keep our mule alive. Kept my brother in school. She met the woman's eyes. I don't know how to be ornamental, if that's what you mean. Severina's smile was small but real. He didn't bring you here to sit pretty. Reina lowered her spoon. Why did he bring me? Severina didn't answer right away. She sat across from her and leaned on the table. Tomas lost his mother young. His father died not long after. The house fell quiet. He was raised more by the land than by people. He doesn't talk unless it's worth hearing. Doesn't ask unless he means it. So why me? Maybe he saw something you don't know about yourself yet. Severina tilted her head. Or maybe he was tired of being alone. Reina stared into the stew. The weight of everything settled on her all at once, her family, the debt, the wagon, the valley, the photo on the mantel. She wasn't a girl anymore, and she wasn't quite a wife yet either. Do I belong here? She asked, barely above a whisper. Severina's answer was simple. That's up to you. The door creaked and Thomas stepped inside. He looked between them, nodded slightly. There's hot water in the back room if you want to wash. Reina stood. Thank you. She paused at the hallway, turned. Why me, Thomas? He held her gaze. Because you looked me in the eye when most wouldn't. And you didn't ask me to be more than I am. She nodded, then disappeared down the hall. Outside, the wind stirred through the orchard. Somewhere deeper in the valley, a hawk cried, once then fell silent. Tomas moved toward the hearth, his shoulders lifting just slightly. He didn't know what she would choose, but something in him, something buried deep, hoped she would stay. You offered me honesty but came wearing another man's skin. The next morning, Reina woke in a sun-warmed room filled with smells she couldn't name, something earthy maybe from the cedar chest in the corner, mixed with the tang of lye soap and sage. The bed beneath her was firm, the quilt heavy handmade. She sat up slowly, as if afraid something would vanish if she moved too quickly. Through the open window, she could hear the clatter of hooves and the soft hum of women's voices. Somewhere someone was singing in Apache, a low melodic call that sounded like water slipping over stone. She dressed quickly, folding her old shawl over her shoulders. It felt out of place here, threadbare and too small. Her boots were dusty, cracked, but they grounded her. She found Thomas outside near the barn, working with a young boy to repair a gate. He was speaking softly, showing the boy how to brace the hinge properly. When he saw her, he didn't stop, just nodded once and returned to the work. Reina watched from a distance, arms crossed. There was something disarming about the way he moved, confident, but not showy, patient, but firm. He didn't carry himself like a man guarding a secret, but he was. Mind walking with me? He asked later, wiping his hands on a cloth. She followed him across the orchard. The morning light filtered through the trees, making the leaves glow gold. They walked without speaking until they reached a small clearing. A bench sat under a piñón tree. From here, the whole valley opened up meadows, the winding river, smoke from the chimney, curling like a brushstroke into the sky. Tomas sat first, elbows on his knees, his gaze fixed on the view. I should have told you, he said. She didn't respond. I wanted to see who you were without the name. Reyna stood, arms still folded. So you lied. I didn't say I was poor. You said you weren't wealthy in gold, she said sharply. You left out the part where you run a timber empire from a hidden Eden. You left out the part where people step aside when you walk through town. You let me believe you were like me. Thomas looked up at her. I am like you. She shook her head. No, you're not. I've been broke. I've been hungry. I've worked this land with my hands since I was 13. But yes, he admitted, voice steady, my grandfather built something here. My father expanded it. When he died, I became the last of the name. Reyna's voice was low, tight. And what name is that? Nahashchi is what they call me in the village. But the name on the papers, the one in Santa Fe, is Tomas Aguilar. She blinked. Aguilar as in yes, he said. Las tres águilas. It's mine, but it hasn't felt like mine for a long time. Reyna stared down at the grass, the world tilting beneath her just slightly. She remembered that name from newspapers Mateo used to scavenge timber rights, legal disputes, land fights up north. She remembered the name being cursed in the mouths of the old men at the trading post, who said the Aguilas Company swallowed valleys and left nothing behind. And what do you want from me, Tomas Aguilar? He rose slowly. I want you to know that the part of me who asked you to come here was real. I meant every word. But you asked as a stranger. Because that's how people treat me when they know who I am. He stepped closer. I didn't want you to look at me like a prize or a warning. I wanted to see how you stood. And you stood. She looked away. Her breath was shallow, her fingers curling at her sides. You brought me here under half-truths, she said. That's not standing. That's tricking someone until they don't have room to say no. I gave you the choice, he said quietly, but not the whole truth to choose from. They stood in silence. The wind moved the branches above them, sending flickers of sunlight across their faces. He didn't reach for her. He just waited. Finally, she turned. I need time. I can give you that. Back at the hacienda, Reyna walked the perimeter of the house, slowly trying to feel the edges of her new world. Workers moved with quiet discipline, feeding chickens, sorting tools, clearing a cart near the stables. Every face greeted her politely, but with reserve. It was clear they didn't yet know what to make of her. She wandered through the courtyard and into a smaller building off the main house. Severina was there drying herbs on a rack. Looks like the storm came early, Severina said without looking up. Reyna gave a humorless laugh. You knew everyone here knows who Thomas is. Doesn't mean they understand him. Reyna sat on the bench near the window. He says he wanted me to choose without the weight of his name. Severina dropped a bunch of dried sage into a bowl. He's afraid of being seen wrong, of being wanted for what he didn't earn. He's already earned plenty. Severina looked at her. What about you? Reyna hesitated. I earned nothing here. I just showed up. Maybe. The older woman sat beside her. But the land don't care who you were before. It only cares what you do now. That evening, Reyna ate alone in the small dining room while Thomas met with the foreman. She took her time tasting each bite, memorizing the room, the soft clink of dishes, the flicker of lantern light on adobe walls, the way the stone floor held the day's warmth. She felt herself settling into the space and resisting it at the same time. Later, as the stars came out, she stood at the edge of the orchard, arms wrapped around herself. The valley was so quiet, it made her ears ring. Thomas approached, not from behind, but from the side where she could see him coming. I sent word to Santa Fe today, he said. My aunt will be coming soon. Reyna tensed. Does she know about me? She will. Reyna looked at him. Will she approve? No. He didn't flinch. But I didn't ask for her blessing. She turned back toward the darkness, watching the moon rise over the ridgeline. If she's anything like the rest of this place, Reyna said softly, she won't like what doesn't fit. She doesn't like anything she can't control. Reyna gave a small nod. Then we'll get along fine. Thomas's voice was quiet. She's not just family. She sits on the estate board. She can make life difficult. Reyna looked him in the eye. So can I. For the first time since they'd met, Thomas smiled without restraint, small but real. He left her then, letting her stand in the orchard alone under a sky that looked too big to hold anything steady. But Reyna wasn't afraid of it anymore. The lie had been cracked open. And now only truth remained. Whatever that would cost. She smiled like a knife and said, a rancher's wife must know her place. The carriage arrived late in the afternoon, wheels grinding over the gravel path, as if it disapproved of the road. It was dark green with gold trim drawn by two sleek horses groomed within an inch of perfection. The driver jumped down before the dust had even settled, opening the door like it was a stage curtain. Doña Jacinta Aguilar stepped out in a deep plum riding dress gloves, as white as funeral lilies, and a hat trimmed in black lace. She was tall for a woman, her frame rigid, her posture sharpened by years of wielding power, with nothing but her voice and presence. Her graying hair was pulled into a perfect twist, and her eyes, cool, gray, merciless, swept across the courtyard like a sword. She didn't acknowledge the ranch hands or Severina, who stood just inside the gate with arms crossed. Her gaze landed on Reyna, standing beside the stable with dust on her boots and wind in her braid. So Jacinta said, voice smooth and even, "You're the girl." Reyna didn't blink. "And you must be the aunt." Jacinta's smile was slow and sharp. "I see he's taught you manners." Reyna met her eyes. "No, my father did." Jacinta stepped forward, the hem of her skirt not daring to touch the ground. "A rancher's wife must know her place, Miss Tenorio." Reyna tilted her head slightly. "Is that what you are? I am, what keeps this family's name from becoming a punchline." Tomas stepped out from the barn, then wiping his hands on a cloth. He approached quietly but without hesitation, placing himself between them without raising his voice. "Tia," he said evenly, "you're early." "I come when I'm needed," Jacinta said, brushing imaginary dust from her sleeve. "And when I hear that you've married without consulting the board, I'm needed." Reyna felt a chill roll down her spine, not from fear, but from the precision in Jacinta's tone. This woman didn't throw fits. She set fires behind closed doors and smiled while the smoke rolled out. They moved inside the hacienda where Severina had laid out water and fresh bread, but Jacinta declined both with a glance. "I brought someone with me," she said. "Don Ignacio Madera." A man followed her, an older thin with a waxed mustache and a briefcase worn at the edges. He nodded once to Thomas, then gave Reyna a cursory glance, like a man inspecting a poorly made saddle. Don Ignacio spoke with a quiet authority. "The company's charter states that any legal union affecting estate succession must be approved by the board. You did not submit notice of intent." Tomas didn't sit. "I didn't intend to submit anything." Jacinta leaned against the archway. "Then we may have a problem, especially now that there's an offer on the table." Reyna looked from one to the other. "What offer?" Jacinta turned slowly toward her. "From the Colorado Mountain Development Company. They want to lease timber rights to the northern slopes. It would triple our operating margin in 2 years, provided there's no instability." Reyna crossed her arms. "You mean me?" Jacinta didn't bother to lie. You were taken from a dust farm with debts and sick relatives. You are neither polished nor connected. That makes you a liability. Tomas moved to Reina's side. She is my wife, and she is not on trial here. Jacinta's voice remained calm. Everything is on trial when legacy is involved. Reina spoke before she could stop herself. Legacy built on what paper and trees Ignacio straightened, on contracts and proper process, which you circumvented. Reina stepped forward. Thomas didn't marry for business. He married for something stronger. Jacinta's lips twitched. How quaint. Thomas raised a hand slightly. Enough. You've said what you came to say. Jacinta took a slow breath. There's a reception in Santa Fe, the governor's winter gala. The development board will be there along with the Cordova family and several potential investors. If you want this marriage taken seriously, then act like it. Reina didn't blink. You want to parade me in front of them. I want to see if you sink or swim, Jacinta replied. They will judge you by your posture, your diction, your every movement. If you survive that room, you'll be harder to remove. Reina looked to Tomas, but he said nothing. Jacinta smiled like a woman who'd already won. It's in 10 days. I'll have a dress sent up. Something less provincial. She turned and exited with Ignacio trailing behind like smoke. Once they were gone, Reina dropped into one of the carved chairs, feeling the weight of the encounter settle in her bones. I'm not a prize hog to be judged at auction, she said. No, Thomas replied quietly. You're a wildfire. And she knows it. Reina looked up at him. So why didn't you stop her? Because the only way to beat her is to outlast her. In public, where her rules live. Reina ran a hand over the wood grain of the table. I've never even owned a proper dress, never worn gloves, never learned which fork to use. I'll teach you, Thomas said, if you want to go. She looked up at him. And if I don't, she'll use that silence as permission to erase you. Reina exhaled through her nose. Then I guess I better learn how to swim. Later that night, Reina found Severina in the herb room grinding lavender for the bathwater. She came in like smoke, Reina said, and she thinks she already knows my worth. Severina didn't look up. She's used to people flinching. I didn't. No, Severina agreed. But now you have to hold your line in a room full of people who don't speak your language but know exactly how to cut. Reina met her gaze. Then I need a knife of my own. Severina handed her a folded bundle. Inside was a green wool dress, modest but sharp. Clean lines buttons carved from abalone shell. It was mine once, Severina said. Back when I stood beside a man who made the world nervous. Reina ran her fingers over the fabric. Was he worth it? Severina's mouth pulled into a thin smile. Some days. Outside, the moon lit the courtyard in silver. Tomas stood at the far end, smoking quietly, eyes lost in thought. Reina stepped onto the stones, the dress still folded in her arms. She'll come for us again, she said. I know. Then we better be ready. Tomas met her eyes across the quiet night, and in that look was something stronger than certainty. It was trust. Fragile, unfinished, but real. The only thing scarier than a rich woman's insult is her silence. The days leading up to the Santa Fe Gala moved like river ice, slow on the surface, sharp underneath. Word spread quickly through the valley that Doña Jacinta had returned, and not just for a family visit. Ranch hands lowered their voices when she passed. Even Severina, who rarely bowed to anyone, gave her space. But Reina didn't give her space. She watched Jacinta closely, not with fear, but with calculation. Every morning, Reina rose early and worked the land alongside the others. She swept the stables, sorted feed, learned the weight of tack and how to tell when a horse was hiding an injury. Then every afternoon, she came inside and sat with Severina at the dining table, practicing her posture and diction like she was training for battle. Tomas offered help too, but cautiously. He didn't coach her like a schoolteacher. He simply walked beside her through the hacienda, pointing out names, paintings, wines, silver patterns, as if passing her keys. "The governor likes brevity," he said once as they passed under the west portico. "Men with money talk slow. Men with power say little." Reina nodded, and the women, he paused. "They speak last and win the room." At night, Reina read letters from Mateo. He wrote in blocky handwriting about the school in Las Cruces and about their father who was gaining strength, slowly coughing less. He always ended his notes with the same phrase, "Don't forget who you are." She hadn't, but she was also starting to understand who she was becoming. One evening, while Jacinta met with Don Ignacio and two visiting accountants, Reina stood outside the office door listening. "She can't hold her own in a city room," Ignacio said. "Not with that background." Jacinta answered calm and cold. "We're not removing her. We're waiting for her to remove herself. I doubt she'll last the reception. That's what we're counting on." Reina stepped back from the door without a sound and walked straight to the herb room. Severina was grinding dried juniper berries. "I need to know what I'm walking into," Reina said. Severina didn't look up. "It's not a room. It's a hunt. They're dressed in silk, but they carry knives. And if I walk in wrong, they'll cut you open and call it tradition." Reina nodded. "Then I want to bleed on their shoes." Severina smiled for the first time in days. They spent hours preparing. Severina taught her how to read a room by listening, not watching, how to keep her voice low, steady, how to respond to insults like they were compliments. "You don't argue," she said. "You redirect, like a horse," Reina asked. Severina smirked. "Exactly." On the fourth day, Thomas brought Reina a box, polished cherrywood tied in deep green ribbon. Inside was a pair of gloves stitched with tiny mountain flowers and a silver hair comb shaped like a hawk in flight. "These belonged to my mother," he said. Reina traced the comb's edges sharp and delicate. "I can't wear these unless I do it right," she said. "You already are." She looked up at him. "You sure?" Thomas met her eyes. "I've never been more." Later, while Jacinta paced the hall, dictating a letter to a courier, Reina passed her without looking away. Their shoulders brushed. Jacinta paused mid-sentence. "You'll need more than confidence, dear." Reina turned, slow and deliberate. "And you'll need more than silk." That night, Reina stood alone at the mirror in the guest bedroom brushing her hair. The dress Severina had altered for her fit, snug at the waist, the color a forest green that matched the valley more than any ballroom. It wasn't fashionable by Santa Fe standards, but it was hers. She didn't want to disappear into velvet and lace. She wanted to walk in like a question no one knew how to answer. She heard Tomas's voice in the hall, low and measured. He entered the room as she was pinning up her hair. He stopped just for a second. "You look like the storm they're praying won't come." Reina smiled, nerves twitching behind her ribs. "You ready to walk beside me in that storm?" He held out his hand. "Always." The next morning, the coach arrived. It was dark and gleaming, pulled by black mares, and driven by a man Reina didn't recognize. Jacinta sat inside, already gloved and unreadable. Reina climbed in without a word. Hours passed in silence as they rolled through pine forest down into high plains. The wind shifted warmer the closer they got to Santa Fe, and the sun seemed to shine differently here, brighter, harder, like it didn't want to hide anything. As they neared the city, Reina leaned out the window. Streets thickened. Telegraph lines buzzed above. Carriages passed with polished wheels and liveried drivers. People wore worry like perfume too much too thick, trying to cover something. The Brown Palace Hotel rose ahead, like a monument to someone else's dream, gaslights in every window, marble horses, at the entry valets in pressed coats, standing like sentinels. Jacinta exited first her skirts, never touching the street. Reina followed boots, meeting stone with purpose. Inside, the air was scented with lavender oil and quiet power. A doorman guided them past a brass fountain and into the heart of the hotel, where the ballroom waited behind heavy carved doors. Jacinta turned just before they entered. "This is your test," she said. "Nothing more." Reina adjusted her gloves. "Then I hope you studied." Tomas appeared beside her like a shadow with a heartbeat. His hand found hers, steady and warm. "Whatever happens in there," he said, "you're not alone." She nodded once, then lifted her chin. When the doors opened, the light hit like judgment. People turned. Whispers rose. But Reina didn't flinch. She walked forward side by side with a man who had once been a stranger toward a room full of eyes that already had her measured. She could feel them dissecting her dress, her posture, her every breath. The only thing scarier than a rich woman's insult was her silence. And this room was full of women who'd already decided she was beneath them. Good. Let them think that. It would make what came next all the more satisfying. They looked at me like I was the wrong name on an invitation. As Reina stepped into the ballroom, the swell of murmured conversation paused just for a breath, just long enough for her to feel it. Like a shift in wind before a storm. The chandeliers hung low, glittering with gaslight that cast soft halos over white tablecloths, crystal glasses, and velvet gowns. A string quartet played near the rear arch notes, floating like perfume. Waiters in gray jackets moved like smoke, their trays balanced with glasses of golden liquid. And every eye that turned toward her did the same thing, measured, judged. She could feel the weight of their glances on her gloves, on the comb in her hair, on the lines of her dress. Women in jewel-toned silks whispered behind feathered fans. Men in tight black suits glanced, then looked again, trying to place her. Thomas kept his hand lightly over hers, but his grip told her he noticed it too. He leaned in just enough for her to hear him over the music. They only see the surface. Reina's jaw tightened. Good. That means they're not looking deep enough. They moved through the room like a current, stopping at the proper greetings. Thomas spoke with a handful of investors, a city councilman, and a rancher from Taos, who wore a gold pocket watch that caught the light like bait. All the men greeted Thomas with warmth. Most of the women greeted Reina like a misplaced teacup, polite, cool, slightly suspicious. One woman with pale curls and a corset stitched tighter than her smile offered a tight-lipped greeting. "You must be Mrs. Aguilar. I expected someone older." Reina answered without blinking. "Well, I expected someone kind. We're both surprised." The woman's smile froze, then vanished like fog in the sun. Jacinta appeared soon after, flanked by a tall man with silver hair and a too-perfect tie. His expression said lawyer, his posture said predator. Reina Jacinta said smoothly, her tone as sweet as spoiled milk. "Allow me to introduce Randolph Blackwood, president of Colorado Mountain Development." Blackwood gave a stiff bow. "A pleasure." "I hear you're the new lady of Las Tres Aguilas." Reina met his eyes. "I am. Surely someone with your background," he said with a flash of teeth, "understands the value of prosperity, of progress." She tilted her head. "My background taught me how to survive drought debt and men who confuse progress with plunder." His eyes flickered, then sharpened. "We're offering jobs, roads, growth. You're offering a clear-cut contract that'll strip 5,000 acres bare and poison 3 creeks. Nearby, someone choked on a sip of wine. Thomas said nothing, his gaze fixed on Blackwood like a hawk watching movement in brush. Blackwood kept his voice low. "The decisions are business. Nothing personal, but the land is personal," Raina said. "Especially to the people who live on it, grow on it, drink from it." Jacinta stepped in smoothly. "You'll have to excuse my niece. She's still adjusting to the scale of things." Raina smiled without warmth. "Your scale looks a lot like greed." Across the room, the governor arrived tall with a thick mustache and a politician's practiced smile. He moved through the crowd like he'd already memorized every name in it. When he reached them, Jacinta lit up like gaslight, her voice higher, sweeter. "Governor Pierce," she said. "So pleased you could join us. And this must be Mrs. Aguilar," he said, turning to Raina with an outstretched hand. "I've heard you've made quite an impression." Raina shook his hand firmly. "I hope it's a good one." "A bold one," he replied, eyes twinkling. "Tomas speaks highly of you, and your knowledge of the watershed protections up near the Nahashti Valley." Blackwood stiffened. Jacinta recovered quickly. "We've had many lively debates about those very issues. Lively is a word for it," Raina said, lifting her glass slightly. The governor laughed, then gestured toward the terrace. "Mrs. Aguilar, would you walk with me? I'd like to hear more of your thoughts." She didn't look at Jacinta as she nodded and stepped beside him. They walked slowly past gold-draped tables and into the cool air outside. Below them, the city glowed gas lamps, flickering carriage wheels ticking across stone. A train whistle called in the distance. "You don't waste words," the governor said. "I wasn't raised with many to spare. I admire that. Most of these people," he gestured toward the ballroom, "think power is in speaking. I think it's in knowing when not to." "I speak when I know they want me quiet," Raina said. "Good," he nodded. "Because people like Blackwood only hear what they can't control." They stood in silence a moment longer. Then he turned to her. "There's talk of a regional advisory board. Someone to represent mountain communities. Not just landowners, but families, tribes, locals who live off the land, not just on it." Raina's heart thudded once. "You'd be good at that," he added. "I don't have the right name." He smiled. "You have the right voice." Back inside the ballroom was shifting music, softening, more drinks, poured conversations leaning closer. Jacinta hovered near Blackwood and Ignacio, speaking low and fast. Tomas approached Raina near the edge of the floor. "What did he say?" "That I have a voice." "You always did." Raina watched the room like a card player watching a rigged table. The stakes had changed. She could feel it in the way people looked at her now, not with confusion, but with curiosity. But Jacinta wasn't done. She approached again, flanked by Blackwood and Ignacio like twin daggers. "We've had papers drawn up," Jacinta said, her smile thin as wire. "Questions about the legal standing of your marriage, based on a state protocol." Blackwood added, "You see, without board approval, the union may be null. It's unfortunate, of course." Raina took the document, scanned it quickly. Thomas stepped forward. "You don't have the right." Jacinta's voice dropped. "The company does, unless she holds a position of contribution." Raina folded the paper and slipped it into her glove. "Funny," she said. "The governor said something about that." She turned slightly toward the waiting server. "Would you be so kind and fetch the envelope I handed off earlier this evening?" The server returned quickly. She took the envelope, unsealed it, and handed it to Ignacio. Inside was a notarized statement bearing the governor's seal, Raina Aguilar's appointment as territorial advisor for mountain community relations, effective immediately. The judge's face drained of color. Jacinta froze. Raina smiled. I guess that makes me official. Across the ballroom, eyes shifted. Power followed weight, and Reyna had just added her own to the scale. She turned to Thomas, feeling his pride without needing him to say it. Now she said, slipping her arm through his, "Shall we dance?" They wanted me to smile and disappear, but I brought fire under my skirt. The music rose and swirled around them, but Reyna barely noticed it. Her feet moved in time with Thomas's one hand in his, the other brushing against his chest. She wasn't a graceful dancer, not like the women gliding across the floor in silks stitched with European thread and French names, but she didn't need to be. She moved with purpose, with rhythm that came from knowing how to plant seed in dry ground, how to carry buckets without spilling, how to walk into a room full of wolves and leave with their teeth. Thomas leaned in, his voice low and proud. "You just folded them all without raising your voice." "I didn't need to," Reyna said. "They were too busy underestimating me." Around the ballroom, conversations shifted. People who'd once given her passing glances now offered nods, smiles. One older woman in a sapphire gown gave Reyna a subtle tip of her head as she passed. Recognition was a slow burn, but it had started. On the far side of the room, Jacinta stood near Blackwood and Don Ignacio. Their expressions were brittle, carefully arranged, but Reyna could see the tension in Jacinta's grip on her fan and the hard lines carved into Blackwood's jaw. They weren't used to losing, especially not to someone like her. Tomas led her off the dance floor as the song faded. A waiter offered glasses of champagne. Reyna declined. "I need a moment," she said softly. He nodded. "I'll be close." She stepped outside again, out onto the high balcony where the wind felt cleaner. The sky above Santa Fe glowed with stars, and the lights of the city below pulsed like a heartbeat. She took in a long breath, tasting victory and nerves in equal measure. Behind her, the door creaked open. She turned, expecting Thomas. It was Ellen Cordova. She was tall, smooth, wrapped in crimson silk, and dripping with a subtle kind of wealth, the kind passed down like china not earned with calloused hands. Her hair was pinned in a twist that probably took a servant an hour. Her eyes, a stormy gray, swept over Reyna like a fine brush-painting judgment. "You're her," Ellen said simply. "I am. My father has mentioned your name." "Then he must be concerned," Reyna said. Ellen smiled, perfectly pleasant and perfectly cold. "Only curious. Thomas has always been unexpected, but now I understand. You're not a threat. You're a symbol." Reyna didn't blink. Of what? Of novelty, disruption. A man like Thomas tires of the same menu, so he chooses something bold. But bold doesn't last. Reyna stepped closer. "That depends on who's holding the flame." Ellen arched a brow. "You're clever. I've had to be." A pause stretched between them, taut as a pulled thread. "I was raised for this world," Ellen said, "for its rules." "You weren't." "That's true." "And do you think they'll let you keep what you've grabbed tonight?" Reyna's voice didn't rise. "They won't have a choice." Ellen smiled again, the kind meant to wound. "Enjoy your dance, Mrs. Aguilar. You'll find society has sharp teeth." Reyna watched her glide back inside. She stayed at the railing, letting the cold wind clear the smoke of that exchange from her skin. It didn't sting. It didn't even surprise her. She was used to being looked down on, but never, not once, had she bowed under it. When she returned to the ballroom, Thomas was deep in conversation with Governor Pierce. Reyna moved to his side, just as the governor gestured toward a quiet corner table. "I'd like to talk more about the watershed project," he said, nodding at Reyna. "If you're willing." They sat together away from the music. Thomas stayed close, but let Reyna take the lead. She spoke clearly, carefully about the springs above Nahashte Valley, the seasonal changes in river flow, the delicate balance of mountain life. She spoke about the people, too, workers and families, how decisions made in polished rooms ended up in their wells, their lungs, their children's futures. Pierce listened. "What about logging alternatives?" he asked. "Selective harvest," Raina said. "Crews trained to avoid runoff areas. Schedules that follow seasons, not just market demand." And the development company, she met his eyes. "They want to cut the mountain down until it matches their maps." He chuckled, short and sharp. "They'll hate you for this. They already do." "I'll take it under review," he said, standing. "But I meant it, Raina. Your voice matters. I hope you keep using it." She thanked him, heart pounding, not with fear, but with focus. She wasn't just defending a title now. She was shaping something larger. When she turned to find Tomas again, she saw Jacinta approaching with another man at her side. This one older, in a dark wool suit with a leather portfolio under his arm. Tomas stiffened the moment he saw him. Judge Morrison. Raina moved closer. Jacinta smiled like winter sunlight. "I thought it was time we clarified a few legal points." Morrison opened the portfolio. "Mr. Aguilar, Mrs. Aguilar, there are provisions in your father's will tied directly to board approval for marital unions. The language is clear. Any marriage seen as a threat to the company's standing can be reviewed. Annulled." Tomas's voice was a growl. "This is an ambush." Raina stepped between them and the table. "May I see the document?" Morrison hesitated, then passed it to her. She read fast. Every word. She'd learned from the mining claims back home, one misplaced line could cost you everything. Her eyes caught it. Buried in the legal knots was a clause. Contribution to estate interests through recognized public service may qualify for exemption from board vote. She looked up. "Governor Pierce recognized my public appointment. That qualifies." Morrison adjusted his collar. "In principle, yes, but it's not." Raina turned. "Governor." He stepped forward, holding an envelope. "We had it notarized earlier today. Her position is official and binding." He handed the document to Morrison, who paled as he read. Jacinta's mask didn't crack, but her silence spoke louder than any outburst. Thomas moved beside Raina. "This marriage stands. By law. By our choice." Jacinta exhaled slowly. "You've made your move. Let's see how long you hold the board." She turned and walked away, Morrison scrambling to keep up. The room buzzed, but no one stopped them. Eyes followed, but no hands reached. Raina let out a slow breath. "You planned that?" Thomas said, wonder in his voice. "I prepared," Raina corrected. "The moment she threatened our marriage, I started preparing. Hope won't hold up against her. We had to be stronger." Tomas looked at her not with surprise, but with something deeper, something solid. "Dance with me again," he said. And this time, as they returned to the floor, the music welcomed them not as curiosities, not as guests, but as people who belonged. They wanted her to smile and disappear. Instead, she smiled and stayed. "They tried to cut me out with paper, but I'd already signed my name into the land." The sun crept through the hotel window the next morning, slow and honey-colored. Raina sat at the edge of the bed, half-dressed hair still braided from the night before. Her gloves lay folded neatly on the vanity beside the silver hair comb Thomas had given her. The ballroom echoes had faded, but something else pulsed beneath her skin resolve. Thomas poured water from the pitcher into a basin and passed her a towel. Neither of them had spoken much since they'd returned to the room. They hadn't needed to. What happened at the gala had spoken louder than words ever could. Raina had stood her ground. Jacinta had retreated. The board had seen it, the governor had endorsed it, and society had been forced to watch. Still, the war wasn't over. Not yet. As Reyna dried her face, Thomas looked at her through the mirror. They'll try something else. Of course they will, Reyna said. But now they know I won't flinch. A knock came at the door. Thomas opened it to reveal a courier, young and nervous. He handed Thomas a folded paper sealed with wax. For you, sir, from your property foreman. Thomas broke the seal as Reyna stepped beside him. His eyes scanned the short letter, and his jaw tightened. They've started early. Reyna took the note from his hand. It was simple, direct. Unauthorized crews clearing timber near the upper slopes. 5 men, 2 saw teams. Claim they have new permissions. Refuse to leave. Jacinta. Reyna handed the note back. She's pushing you into a corner. She wants you to retaliate and look reckless. Tomas's eyes burned with anger. She's threatening the land, and we can't let her win by playing her game. Thomas paced the room, once then stopped. We'll leave by midday. I want to be in the valley before they cut past the old creek bed. Back in the valley, news spread fast. By the time Thomas and Reyna arrived at the hacienda, 2 ranch hands were already saddling fresh horses. Severina met them near the stable, her sleeves rolled and her eyes sharp. She's not even pretending anymore, she said. No, Reyna said, but neither are we. Mateo stood nearby, map case in hand. He looked older than he had when she'd left, taller, sun-browned, steady. I want to come with you, he said to Reyna. She hesitated. I've been walking the slopes while you were gone, he added. I know where the trees thin and where the springs run shallow. If they cut near the runoff line, we could lose the whole East Basin. Reyna nodded once. Saddle up. They rode out as the sun dipped behind the peaks, taking the old trail that wound up behind the orchard and followed the timberline west. The air grew colder, cleaner, more aware of its own silence. By the time they reached the crest above the Nahashta Valley, they saw it. 5 men. 2 saw rigs. A mule team. One of the crews had already felled 4 trees near the creek bend, and fresh sawdust scattered the soil like blood. Thomas dismounted first, walking into the clearing with the confidence of a man defending his own skin. One of the men, a red-faced foreman with a Denver accent, stepped forward. You must be Aguilar, he said. We've got contracts. Stamped, filed. Not with me, Thomas replied. The man smirked. Talk to your aunt. She doesn't own the ground under your boots, Thomas said. Reyna stepped up beside him, her coat flaring in the breeze. You're trespassing on protected watershed. The man looked her over and laughed. And who the hell are you? She pulled the document from her coat. Her official appointment as Territorial Advisor for Mountain Community Relations. By law, she said calmly, I represent this land and the people tied to it. You're in violation of territorial environmental protections and local usage rights. One of the younger men behind him shifted uncomfortably. The foreman squinted. You don't have the power to shut us down. No, she said. But the governor does, and I'm his eyes in this valley. She turned to Mateo, who unrolled a small survey map marked in charcoal. These lines mark seasonal water flow, she explained. Cutting here risks destabilizing the creek bed, and if that floods the valley below, goes with it. The foreman frowned. You came up here with a map drawn by a child. I came up here with facts, Reyna snapped. That child knows this land better than any city clerk. And unlike you, we'll still be here when the ground gives way. The man hesitated. Thomas stepped forward. You can leave on your own, or we can make it official. Silence fell. The younger saw crew exchanged glances, then one of them dropped his tool. He's right. We're not paid enough to ruin a valley. That was all it took. Within an hour, the crews packed up. One mule team wheeled around. The red-faced foreman cursed under his breath, but he didn't argue again. By sunset, the clearing was empty. Reyna knelt beside the wounded stumps. She pressed her palm to the fresh cut as if to remember it. "They'll send more," Thomas said behind her. "They always do," she replied. "But we'll be ready." They rode back in near dark, the first stars breaking through the sky like slow embers. Matteo rode beside Reyna, quiet but proud. "Where did you learn to speak like that?" he asked. She smiled at him. "From you. From home." When they returned, Severina had lit lanterns all around the courtyard. The house looked golden from the ridge, like something rooted deeper than time. Reyna dismounted slowly, boots hitting earth with finality. Thomas helped her down. "You didn't just defend the land," he said. "You claimed it." She looked out at the trees, the sky, the shape of the hills wrapped around them like an embrace. "They tried to cut me out with paper," she said softly, "but I'd already signed my name into the land. And this time she knew no one was taking it away." Land can be measured by acres, but legacy is measured by hands who holds it, who bleeds for it, and who won't let it go. Snow arrived 2 days later, drifting down from the northern peaks like a whispered warning. It coated the fence rails, and the high porch posts in white lace dusted the orchard's bare branches, softened the sharp edges of the valley. Winter had officially arrived in Las Tres Aguilas, not with violence, but with quiet persistence. Reyna stood outside the barn in the early morning, her breath fogging in the air. She wore Thomas's old wool coat over her own, the sleeves cuffed the hem, dusting her boots. Beside her, Severina ladled warm mash into feeding buckets for the horses. The smell of molasses and oats steamed upward. "How many more storms before spring?" Reyna asked. Severina wiped her hands on a cloth. "Enough to test every roof and every marriage." Reyna smiled, but her heart carried a weight. Snowfall meant slower travel. It meant isolation. It meant that whatever Jacinta was planning, she'd likely move from paper to whispers, from legal threats to influence, and Reyna could feel it coming. The quiet tension of someone waiting to strike under the cover of silence. By midday, Thomas had returned from the South Ridge. His face was flushed with cold, but his voice was calm. "They've postponed the vote," he said, stepping inside and unwrapping his scarf. "The board. 2 members have called for a reassessment." Reyna looked up. "Because of me, because of what you represent." He poured a cup of coffee from the kitchen stove and leaned against the wall, tired but watchful. "Jacinta's pushing an alternative proposal," he said. "One that removes us both from a state authority. She wants control moved to a city trust." Reyna's hand curled around the back of the chair. She'd let the land be run by men who've never touched it. Tomas nodded. "She says it's about protection, about neutrality." Reyna shook her head. "It's about erasure." A knock came just after dusk. Thomas opened the door to find Jacinta standing on the porch, snow speckling the shoulders of her midnight cloak. She didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped inside like she still owned the place. "We need to talk," she said simply. Thomas didn't move. "You've made it clear what you want." "I've made clear what's necessary," she corrected. Then her eyes landed on Reyna. "And I'd prefer to speak to your wife alone." Reyna held her gaze. "Then you can speak right here." Jacinta exhaled as if Reyna's presence were a stone in her shoe. "You've made quite a name for yourself, Reyna. You've turned this house into a symbol, one that doesn't belong to you." Reyna didn't flinch. "It does now." Jacinta stepped closer. "You think legacy is something you inherit by marrying into it?" No legacy is what survives when you're gone. You've brought too much attention, too much division. The board will fracture under this noise. Reyna took a single step forward. Good. Maybe it needs to. Jacinta's voice dropped. You could walk away. Cleanly. We'd offer compensation. Enough to set up your family. Enough to disappear. Reyna stared at her. You don't understand, do you? This isn't about comfort. It's not even about money. Then what is it? Reyna's voice was low but clear. It's about not letting someone like you decide who belongs and who doesn't. Not anymore. Jacinta's face held, but something flickered behind her eyes. A memory. A warning. Then she straightened her spine. You think you've won something, but legacy, real legacy, is built in silence, in corridors, in bloodlines and backrooms. You've lit a fire, but fires burn out. Reyna walked past her to the hearth where the logs still glowed red. Maybe, she said, but the land will still be here, and I plan to be standing on it. Jacinta said nothing as she walked out, her footsteps muted by the snow. Reyna watched the door close, then turned to Thomas. She's going to try to divide the board. She already has, he said. But not all of them are hers. Over the next week, letters arrived from across the territory, some with cautious support, others with blunt warnings. 2 tribal representatives sent word that they supported Reyna's appointment and would testify before the governor's council if needed. A rancher's widow in San Miguel wrote simply, "You speak like someone who's had dirt under her nails. That's all we've needed for years." But the pressure mounted too. One night, Thomas received a visit from Sheriff Lujan. There's been talk, he said, hat in hand, about water rights, about forged survey lines. Word is someone's trying to stir up the settler families along the eastern slope. Reyna stood behind Thomas. Trying to turn them against us, Lujan nodded. Claiming you plan to seize grazing land, that you're using your appointment to change inheritance laws. It's a lie, Thomas said. I know. But lies don't need truth to start a fire. Later that night, Reyna sat by the fire rubbing her hands together. I thought once I was inside the room I'd be safe, she said. Tomas knelt beside her. You're not safe. You're important. That's harder. She looked at him. Do you ever wish I'd stayed quiet? He smiled without hesitation. Never. I'd follow you into any storm. That storm rolled in 2 days later, not with weather but with paper. A legal notice, delivered by courier, signed by 3 board members. Temporary suspension of all Aguilar family voting privileges pending full audit of estate actions and appointments. Reyna stared at the seal. Cold spread in her chest. They're freezing us out, she said, trying to make us irrelevant while they tie us up in review. Tomas took the paper, read it, then looked up. So what do we do? Reyna stood slowly. Her shoulders were tired but unbroken. We gather our allies. We speak to the people. If the board wants a trial, let them have it in the eyes of the whole territory. Outside, the wind picked up swirling snow around the stone wall that had stood for 3 generations. The house creaked, but it held. So did Reyna. Land can be measured by acres, she whispered. But legacy is measured by hands, who holds it, who bleeds for it, and who won't let it go. And she wasn't letting go. Not now. Not ever. They thought the land would keep quiet. They forgot it had a voice, and now it has mine. The church bell rang 5 times before anyone spoke. Reyna stood near the steps of the adobe chapel in the heart of the valley, a wide shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her breath rising in puffs of white against the early morning frost. Townspeople gathered in slow clusters. Some brought chairs. Some leaned on fence posts. Others simply stood faces lined from sun and time. They'd come from the slopes, from dry farms, from river-hugging plots that had known flood and drought alike. They weren't here for ceremony. They were here for truth. Beside her, Thomas helped an older rancher settle onto a wooden crate, patting his shoulder in greeting. On the other side of the yard, Mateo handed out folded flyers, maps of the disputed lands. Names of the signatories, details Jacinta's lawyers never expected to be shared. This wasn't just a meeting. It was a reckoning. Reyna stepped up onto the makeshift platform, a hay wagon backed against the chapel wall, and faced the gathered crowd. Her heart thudded, slow but steady. Every pair of eyes fixed on her, some curious, some skeptical, some weary from years of being told their voices didn't matter. She cleared her throat. "I wasn't born into land," she began, her voice strong. "I was born into work, into drought years and washing buckets, into making dinner from almost nothing and praying a blight wouldn't take the beans. I was born into a family that only had one thing to pass down, how to hold on." Heads nodded. A few murmurs of quiet agreement. "When I married Thomas," she continued, "some thought I was stepping into a fortune. But land isn't fortune. Not by itself. It's duty, and debt, and memory." She paused, letting the silence settle. "They're trying to take it now. Not with guns or fences, but with silence, with courtrooms and clauses, with signatures that mean nothing to the roots under our feet." A man from the back called out, "They say it's about fairness." Reyna looked toward him. Fairness would mean we all had a seat when those decisions were made. Fairness would mean they came to us, not sent strangers to tear down the trees we drink from. A woman near the front spoke up next. "My brother's grazing lease got revoked last week. No notice." Reyna nodded. "They're turning us against each other." Quietly. Piece by piece. Another voice, firmer. "So what do we do?" Reyna stepped down from the wagon. "We raise our voices. We show them that this land has names, stories, bloodlines. We show them that it can't be sold off behind doors because it's already spoken for." Thomas moved beside her, holding up the signed declarations they'd collected. Ranchers, farmers, native families, longtime valley workers. Over 40 endorsements. Proof. "We're filing formal countersuit," Reyna said. "We'll block the trust transfer, challenge their audit, and demand an open hearing. But we need every voice. We need your names. Not just as supporters, as owners, stewards." The crowd stirred. People shifted, looked at each other. Then the old rancher Thomas had helped, raised his hand, slow but steady. "You put my name first," he said. "I've lived on the same 6 acres for 70 years, and I ain't dying with it turned into a ski hotel." Laughter rippled. Then a few more voices rose, soft yeses, hard nods. Severina, standing in the back with her apron still dusted in flour, crossed her arms and called out, "You know where I stand." Mateo began passing clipboards through the crowd, collecting names, signatures, fingerprints if needed. Reyna stepped back, breath catching in her chest. They were answering. Back at the hacienda, the front room turned into an impromptu operations center. Maps were spread across tables, letters from allies in Santa Fe and Las Cruces pinned to the walls. Severina brewed coffee by the gallon. Men and women from the valley came and went, some with documents, some just to offer a hand or haul wood. The Aguilar house had turned into a war camp, one filled with warmth and clarity. Reyna moved through it all like she belonged to it. Because she did. But as dusk settled and the last file was logged, a knock came at the side entrance. Tomas opened it. Jacinta stood there again, uninvited, but this time with less frost and more fire. "You've made your spectacle," she said. But you're splitting the estate. You'll lose everything trying to save too much. Reyna walked forward, unflinching. What you call splitting, we call returning. Jacinta held up a sealed envelope. This is your final warning. Drop the challenge. Step down from your appointment. If you do, the board will consider reinstating your marital authority. Tomas can retain his land. You'll keep your home. And if I don't, Jacinta's lips thinned. Then we let the fire burn everything. Reyna took the envelope, but didn't open it. You keep talking about fire, she said. But you never built one. You only know how to stand near other people's warmth. Jacinta blinked, the insult slicing clean. Reyna turned and handed the envelope to Mateo. File it. Use the ink to light the stove. The boy grinned and tucked it under his arm. Jacinta hesitated like she wanted to say more, but she'd already lost the room. And she knew it. She left in silence. That night, Reyna stood by the window of their bedroom watching snow begin to fall again. Light flurries, nothing serious. Enough to dust the land, remind everyone that the mountain didn't care about titles or inheritance. It only remembered who loved it well. Tomas wrapped his arms around her from behind chin on her shoulder. They're scared, he said. They should be, she whispered. Because for the first time the land has a voice. She rested her hand over his, and now it has mine. I didn't come to inherit a mansion. I came to build something that outlives me. The snow had melted in streaks down the hills by the time the hearing was called. A makeshift courtroom had been assembled in the old town hall in Santa Fe, its wood-paneled walls lined with folding chairs and ledger tables. The board of Aguilar Holdings sat behind a long, elevated desk, their expressions severe and dusted with arrogance. Beside them sat Judge Arturo Peña, called in as an independent arbiter by order of the governor. Reyna stood straight-backed at the front of the room, not in silks or pearls, but in a plain navy dress, the one she'd worn to her mother's funeral. Her hands were calloused. Her boots carried mud from the orchard that morning, and behind her sat 2 full rows of valley residents, Severina Mateo, the old rancher, townspeople, field hands, weavers, and her neighbors. On the opposing side sat Jacinta Sharp in charcoal gray, flanked by Blackwood, and 2 lawyers who whispered constantly and wrote even more. A third row behind them included members of the Denver elite, some from land trusts, others from railroad boards. Their suits gleamed. Their shoes had never known dust. Thomas sat quietly in the front row, just behind Reyna. He hadn't spoken much that morning, but she felt his presence like a stone wall behind her. Judge Peña tapped his gavel once. We are convened to determine the legality of the Aguilar Estate Board's decision to suspend the rights of Thomas and Reyna Aguilar, and to assess the integrity of the estate's operations and appointments. He looked up, dark eyes sharp. We begin with the petitioners. Reyna stepped forward. The room hushed. I won't start with titles, she said. I wasn't born with any. I came here with a bag of sewing needles, a brother to feed, and more silence than memory. But I learned the land. I listened to it. She unrolled a scroll, held it for the court to see. This is a declaration signed by 43 families across the Nahashta Valley and its surrounding ridges. Names, not numbers. People who've lived, worked, and buried their kin on that soil. People this estate was built on. A murmur ran through the room. She stepped closer to the board. You want to say I disrupted order? But what I disrupted was a closed system. A room where only the rich and named were allowed to speak. You called my marriage a scandal, my title a loophole. But what scares you isn't my name. It's that others are starting to realize they belong too. Jacinta leaned forward. You undermined centuries of estate governance with personal ambition. Reyna turned to her. No, I gave people the tools to stop asking permission. She laid down a stack of documents, surveys, water rights, public appointment records, and legal affidavits. This hearing isn't about a title. It's about what kind of legacy this estate leaves behind, and whether that legacy serves a mountain or sells it off piece by piece. Judge Peña motioned to the defense. Jacinta stood slowly. With all due respect to Mrs. Aguilar's storytelling estates are not run by sentiment. They are run by structure, by law. If we allow personal influence to override inherited protocol, we unravel the very fabric of responsible land stewardship. Is that what you call secret logging contracts? Reyna asked. Responsibility, the judge held up a hand. Order. Jacinta's lips thinned. We maintain that Mrs. Aguilar's appointment was a political favor, not a qualified placement, and her actions have jeopardized the estate's standing. Peña turned to Reyna again. Do you have a final statement? Reyna looked out over the room. My father-in-law taught Thomas one thing above all: don't take more from the land than you can give back. I carry that now. I didn't come to inherit a mansion. I came to build something that outlives me. Something rooted. Something shared. She stepped back. Silence followed. It held long enough for everyone to realize how still the room had become. Judge Peña looked down, made a few notes, then cleared his throat. This court finds the suspension of Mr. and Mrs. Aguilar's estate rights to be improperly enacted. All voting authority is restored immediately. A collective exhale rippled behind her. Someone clapped once, then stopped unsure, but it was enough. The board is hereby ordered to reinstate full authority to Tomás and Reyna Aguilar and to recognize Mrs. Aguilar's appointment as official and permanent. Jacinta's eyes didn't move. She sat, frozen hands tight on the arms of her chair. Outside, when the doors opened, the people came alive. Applause broke out. Mateo whooped loud enough to startle a pigeon from the eaves. Severina threw her arms around Reyna, whispering, "You didn't just win. You changed the whole damn story." Tomás reached her next. He didn't say anything. He just held her face in both hands and kissed her like the world had stopped spinning. Later that week, they hosted a gathering at Las Tres Águilas. Not a ball, not a gala, just music, food, open doors. The orchard had been lit with lanterns, bread baked in clay ovens. Musicians played corridos from the porch. Children ran under the apple trees with red cheeks and muddy boots. Elders smoked pipes near the well. Laughter echoed down the hills. Inside the old study, once lined with tax ledgers and estate scrolls, now held baskets of letters, petitions, planting maps, and photographs. Above the mantel, Thomas hung a new frame, the signed declaration of Valley families now preserved behind glass. Below it, a small engraved plaque. Legacy is not inheritance. It's what you grow when no one's watching. As the night wore on, Reyna stepped outside to the porch. She stood alone for a moment, listening. The land answered in its way, crickets, a soft wind, the crunch of footsteps behind her. Thomas joined her hands in his pockets. "You ready to rest?" he asked. She smiled. "No, I'm ready to start." He nodded slowly, looking out over the fields. "We didn't just hold the land," she said. "We made room in it. And now it would hold them back stronger than names, stronger than walls. A place that outlived them both." The educational lesson learned from this story is that real legacy isn't about wealth or titles. It's about what we protect, who we stand up for, and how we treat the land and people around us. Even when the world favors power and pedigree, courage and honesty still matter. Especially with age, we know that doing the right thing quietly, consistently, and with heart leaves a mark far deeper than any signature.